On October 12, 1492, a sailor named Rodrigo de Triana stood in the bow of a ship and saw a coastline no European had ever seen from that direction. He shouted one word, and the world split in two, a before and an after. The man who sent him there died 14 years later in a rented room in Valladolid, still believing he had reached Asia. If stories like this bring you comfort and peace, then please subscribe to our channel. Also, comment where you are listening from and what time it is now. Let's continue. He was wrong about almost everything he set out to prove. And yet here we are. Tonight we follow a wool weaver's son from Genoa, a man who was rejected by Portugal, kept waiting by Spain for 7 years, arrested in chains, and stripped of everything he had fought for. A man who sailed west, looking for something that wasn't there, and found something the world had never imagined. This is the bedtime biography of Christopher Columbus. Chapter 1. The Boy at the Harbor Genoa, sometime around 1455. The sun has not yet cleared the ridge of the Ligurian hills, and already the harbor is alive. Rope sellers call out from the docks. Timber yards smell of fresh pine and salt. The great stone breakwater stretches into the gray-green water of the Ligurian Sea, and beyond it, always endlessly beyond it, the open Mediterranean shifts and breathes like something living. The city wakes to this. It has always woken to this. In a narrow house near the Porta dell'Olivella, in the eastern quarter of the city, a family is also waking. Domenico Colombo, wool weaver, cheese seller, keeper of the city gate, rises before light. His wife, Susanna Fontanarosa, moves quietly in the kitchen. There are 5 children. The eldest is a boy with reddish hair and light eyes, already tall for his age, already restless in the particular way of children who feel the world is somehow larger than the room they are standing in. His name is Cristoforo Colombo. He does not yet know what he is. He knows only what he sees, and what he sees every day from every angle the streets of Genoa allow is the sea. Genoa, in the 1450s, is one of the greatest port cities in the world, not the largest, not the wealthiest, but among the most alive. Ships from across the known world pass through its harbor. Merchants from Venice, Alexandria, Constantinople. Sailors who speak languages that dissolve in the air like smoke. Cargo holds filled with mastic from the Greek islands, silk from the eastern trade routes, timber, wine, iron, grain. Genoa has built its fortune on movement, on the willingness to leave and the skill to return. A boy growing up here learns certain things without being taught. He learns that the horizon is not a wall, but a door. He learns that men who go out on ships come back changed, or do not come back at all. He learns the sound of rigging and wind, the particular creak of a hull under load, the way a sailor walks differently from a man who has never left land. These things enter him the way salt enters everything in a harbor city, quietly, completely, without announcement. Domenico puts Cristoforo to work young. There is wool to card, yarn to weigh, fabric to carry to the buyers who come and go from the workshop near the gate. There is the cheese stand, too, wedges of pale, firm cheese laid out on a wooden counter, and the boy learning to make change, to smile at customers, to understand the small transactions that hold a family together. He is good at it. He is obedient. But his eyes, his son Fernando would one day write, were always somewhere else. And what Antonio Gallo, a Genoese historian who knew the Columbus family, recorded is this: that the Columbus boys began sailing as teenagers, perhaps even earlier. Perhaps as young as 10, Cristoforo went out for the first time on the water. A neighbor's boat, a short run down the coast to load dried fish, or across to Corsica, near enough to see from the hills on a clear day. We do not know exactly what he felt. We only know what he later wrote, that from a very early age he entered sailing upon the sea and never stopped. The harbor waited for him every morning, and every morning it was enough. Chapter 2. The Wool Weaver's Son Goes to See Savona, 1470. The family has moved. Domenico Colombo has packed up the workshop, the tools, the accumulated small dignities of a Genoese artisan's life, and relocated his family westward along the Ligurian coast to Savona, a quieter city, less grand than Genoa, where he takes over a tavern and tries his luck in a different trade. Christopher is nearly 19. His brother Bartholomew is 9. The younger children are still young enough to adapt without grief. But Christopher, who has spent his entire conscious life within earshot of Genoa's harbor, stands in Savona and feels the particular restlessness of a person who knows, with growing certainty, that the life immediately in front of him is not the life he is going to live. He has been working for his father since childhood, carding raw wool, carrying bolts of finished cloth, standing behind the cheese counter in the cold morning air, making change, watching the road. He has done it faithfully. He is the eldest son, and he understands what that means. But somewhere in those years of faithful, ordinary work, something else has been building. A hunger fed not by the workshop, but by the harbor, not by the wool trade, but by the sailors who passed through Genoa with their scarred hands and their impossible stories of the world beyond the horizon. By 1473, the records show it plainly. Columbus is no longer simply a weaver's apprentice. He has secured a position as a business agent for 3 of Genoa's most powerful merchant families, the Centurione, the Di Nigro, and the Spinola. These are names that open doors, men of serious wealth, serious reach, serious ambition. They send their agents on ships. They trust their cargo to people who can navigate not only the sea, but the complicated human world of foreign ports, negotiation, and commercial risk. Columbus is one of those people now. His early voyages take him across the Mediterranean, routes he would later recall with the casual precision of a man describing familiar streets. To Tunis on the North African coast, to Marseille, and then, in the early 1470s, the voyage that lodges itself most deeply in his memory, to Chios, the Greek island in the Aegean Sea, then under Genoese control, famous across the Mediterranean for its mastic, the resinous sap harvested from small, gnarled trees that grow on the island's southern hills, used in medicines, varnishes, and the flavoring of food and wine. Columbus would remember those mastic trees for the rest of his life. Years later, spotting a similar tree on the shores of the Caribbean, he would reach instinctively for the comparison, likening it in his journal to what he had seen on Chios. Memory works this way for sailors. The world becomes a catalogue of coastlines, smells, winds, and the particular quality of light on water at different latitudes. Columbus was building this catalogue carefully, voyage by voyage, year by year, even when he did not yet know what it was for. But it is not only the sea that educates him during these years, it is also the books. Columbus is not a formally educated man. The university records of Pavia show no trace of him, despite what his son Fernando would later claim. What he has instead is something rarer and in some ways more powerful, an autodidact's fierce, focused, almost obsessive appetite for knowledge in the service of a single growing idea. He reads in Castilian, in Portuguese, in Latin. He reads geography. He reads cosmography. He reads the ancient authorities, Ptolemy, Pliny the Elder, the travels of Marco Polo with their golden descriptions of Cathay and Cipangu, the island of Japan, where rooftops gleam with gold and the harbors are deep and welcoming. He reads the theologian Pierre Dailly's Imago Mundi, a medieval geography of the world, and fills its margins with his own notes in a hand that is careful, urgent, alive with argument. He is, in these years, assembling a theory, and the theory is this: the ocean between Europe and Asia is not as wide as the authorities say. The world is smaller. Asia is closer. A man with the right ships and the right winds could cross the Atlantic and arrive at the eastern shores of the known world, and do it faster and more directly than any route yet attempted. He is wrong, of course. Spectacularly, consequentially wrong. The ocean is almost 3 times wider than he believes, but he does not know that yet. And the beautiful, terrible thing about a conviction held before the evidence arrives is that it feels exactly like certainty. In 1476, the Centurion family sends him on a convoy, 5 ships, armed and loaded, bound for England and Flanders. Columbus sails as an ordinary seaman on a Flemish vessel called the Bechala. It is, by the standards of his previous voyages, a significant journey. Out through the Strait of Gibraltar, northward along the Atlantic face of Portugal, into waters broader and rougher than the Mediterranean he has always known. He is 24 years old, or thereabouts. Reddish-haired, blue-eyed, already taller than most men around him, already carrying somewhere behind his eyes the map of a world that does not yet exist on paper. The convoy sails northward into August, and the sea, as it always does, has other plans. Chapter 3. Shipwreck and a New Shore. August 13th, 1476. The Atlantic coast of Portugal. The sun is high, and the water is deep blue, and the 5 ships of the Genoese convoy are moving steadily northward along the Portuguese coast, their holds full, their crews easy, with the rhythm of open water after weeks at sea. Then the French come. Guillaume de Cazenove is a privateer, a man who has served as Vice Admiral of Normandy under the French king, and has since found piracy more profitable than loyalty. He commands a combined fleet of French and Portuguese vessels, and on this August afternoon, off the rocky headland near Cape St. Vincent, at the southwestern tip of Portugal, he spots the Genoese convoy and makes his decision. Genoa and France are technically at peace. It does not matter. The law of the sea in 1476 belongs to whoever has more guns. The attack begins without warning. What follows is a day of brutal, close-quarters fighting. Grappling hooks thrown between hulls, men climbing across ropes with knives, the sound of cannon fire rolling across the water and coming back as echo from the cliffs. By nightfall, 3 Genoese ships have gone to the bottom. 4 of Casenove's ships have gone down too. The sea between the remaining vessels is littered with wreckage, broken planking, rope, bodies, cargo spilled and floating in the late afternoon light. The Bechala, Columbus's ship, is among the casualties. What happens next is documented in its broad outlines by Samuel Eliot Morison, the great 20th century biographer of Columbus, drawing on the few surviving accounts. Columbus, wounded, finds himself in the water. The ship is gone or going. Around him, the Atlantic surges and pulls. He grasps a floating oar. Some accounts say a piece of wreckage, a sweep of timber from the broken ship, and he begins to swim, not toward another vessel, toward land. The Portuguese coast is visible in the distance, a dark line against the sky, perhaps 6 miles away. 6 miles is a very long way to swim in open ocean. especially wounded, especially in August heat, with the water churning from the battle, with the weight of wet clothes and the particular terror of deep water beneath you. He kicks the oar ahead of him, rests on it, kicks it again and again. The shore comes no closer, then, at some point in the failing light of that long August day, close enough to touch, he comes ashore near Lagos, on the southern coast of Portugal. The people of Lagos treat him kindly. They give him food and shelter and let him rest his torn hands and his exhausted body in the warmth of a Portuguese summer evening. And then, when he has recovered enough to travel, someone tells him his younger brother Bartholomew is living in Lisbon. He walks northward. This is the moment everything changes. Not the battle, not the shipwreck, not even the 6 miles of open water. The change is here, in this quiet, almost accidental fact, that Columbus, washing ashore on the Portuguese coast, finds himself deposited not in some obscure fishing village at the edge of the known world, but at the threshold of the most extraordinary maritime civilization in 15th century Europe. Lisbon in 1476 is alive in a way that almost no other city on earth is alive at this particular moment in history. Portugal has been pushing southward along the African coast for decades under the institutional momentum of Prince Henry the Navigator, who died in 1460, but whose program of systematic exploration has never stopped. By 1471, Portuguese ships have reached the Gold Coast of Guinea, present-day Ghana, and found gold. The city hums with charts and instruments, with sailors returning from the edge of the known world and cartographers trying to draw what they describe. There are map shops and navigational schools and taverns where old sailors drink and argue about the shape of the African coast and whether the ocean beyond it ever ends. There are Genoese merchants, too, a whole community of them, because Genoa has always followed trade, and Lisbon is where trade is going. Bartholomew Columbus is one of those Genoese cartographers. He has established a small workshop producing and selling marine charts, the detailed hand-drawn portolan charts that sailors use to navigate coastlines, marked with compass roses and rum lines, and the accumulated knowledge of hundreds of voyages reduced to ink on parchment. When Christopher arrives, still healing from the shipwreck, still smelling of the sea, Bartholomew takes him in. And Lisbon takes him in too. Columbus would stay in this city for nearly 9 years. He would sail from it to Ireland and possibly Iceland, feeling the immense tides that he later wrote about with a kind of awe. He would sail southward to the Portuguese trading fortress at São Jorge da Mina, on the Gold Coast of Africa, crossing the equator and watching the stars shift in the sky above him, learning the great Atlantic wind systems that no European had yet fully understood. The northeast trade winds blowing steadily westward at lower latitudes, the westerlies pushing eastward at higher latitudes. Drop south to go west, rise north to come home. The Volta do Mar, the Portuguese called it, the turn of the sea. He memorized it. He held it in his body the way a musician holds a melody, not as abstract knowledge, but as something physical, something felt. He also read, voraciously, systematically, in every spare hour the city allowed him. He obtained the works of Ptolemy, of Marco Polo, of the cosmographer Pierre Dailly. He wrote notes in the margins of everything he touched. His copy of Dailly's Imago Mundi still exists in Seville, its margins crowded with his handwriting, arguments, calculations, underlinings, the private conversation of a man who is slowly, carefully building a case. The case is this: the ocean between Europe and Asia is crossable. The world is smaller than the authorities claim. He can do it. He does not know yet how many times he will be told he is wrong. He does not know yet the years of waiting that lie ahead, the closed doors, the polite refusals, the commissions of experts who will look at his numbers and shake their heads. He does not know that the greatest discovery in human history will come not from being right, but from being wrong in exactly the right way. He knows only the harbor, the wind, the maps spreading under his hands in the lamplight of his brother's workshop, and the idea growing quietly like something that has already decided to be true. Chapter 4. Lisbon and the Flowering of the Idea Lisbon, 1477. The city is built on 7 hills above the mouth of the Tagus River, and from almost every street you can see the water. Not the small contained water of a harbor enclosed by breakwaters and familiar stone. This is the Tagus estuary, wide, tidal, restless, opening westward into something that has no name yet on any reliable map, only the names that fear and imagination have given it. The Sea of Darkness, some call it. The Green Sea of Gloom. The Ocean Sea. The place where the known world ends, and something else, uncharted and perhaps unending, begins. Columbus has washed ashore here by accident. The attack on the convoy, the 6-mile swim, the kindness of the people of Lagos, all of it has deposited him, wounded and salt-crusted and alive, in the one city in the world where his idea might finally find a home. He does not know this yet. He knows only that his brother Bartholomew is here, and that there is work, and that for the moment, that is enough. Bartholomew has already made a place for himself. The younger brother, quieter than Christopher, more methodical, equally intelligent, runs a small cartography workshop, producing and selling marine charts to the sailors, merchants, and naval officers who pass through Lisbon in a steady, purposeful stream. It is good work in the right city. Lisbon in the late 1470s is the beating heart of European exploration, the place where the knowledge of the world is being redrawn year by year, voyage by cautious voyage, as Portuguese ships push further and further down the coast of Africa into waters no European has sailed before. Columbus joins his brother. He learns to draw charts. He handles portolan maps, those beautiful, intricate documents covered in compass roses and coastlines, hand-drawn on vellum, the accumulated knowledge of generations of Mediterranean sailors rendered in ink and pigment. He sells them, he studies them, and in the evenings, in whatever light remains, he reads. He is reading everything he can find. In the Biblioteca Colombina in Seville, several of Columbus's personal books survive to this day, annotated in his own hand, the margins dense with notes in a careful, urgent script. His copy of Pierre Dailly's Imago Mundi contains hundreds of such annotations. His copy of Pliny the Elder's Natural History, his copy of Aeneas Sylvius's Historia Rerum Ubique Gestarum, a geographical survey of the known world. Marco Polo's Travels, with its rhapsodic descriptions of Chipangu, Japan, where the palace of the king is roofed with gold, where the harbors are deep, where the spices grow so thick the air itself is fragrant. He reads all of it, and in the margins he argues, he calculates, he builds a case. The case rests on a calculation, and the calculation is wrong, though Columbus will never know it. He reads the estimate of the ancient geographer Marinus of Tyre, who believed the landmass of Eurasia stretched further eastward than Ptolemy had calculated. He reads the apocryphal biblical book of 2 Esdras, which suggests that 6/7 of the globe is habitable land and only 1/7 ocean. He reads Toscanelli's letter, which places Japan approximately 2,500 miles west of the Azores and China only 2,500 miles beyond that. Each source, read through the lens of desire, confirms what Columbus already believes. The Atlantic is crossable. Asia is close. The distance from the Canary Islands to the coast of Japan is, by his calculation, approximately 2,400 miles. The actual distance is closer to 10,600, but he does not know this. And so the idea flowers in him, fed by everything he reads and everything he observes, growing more detailed and more certain with each passing season. Because he is also sailing. From his Lisbon base, Columbus ventures widely, further than he has gone before. He sails northward to England, probably touching at Bristol, and to Ireland, where he visits Galway Bay. He may have sailed further still. He writes in a later letter of traveling 100 leagues beyond Thule in February 1477, noting the immense tides, which suggests he may have reached Iceland. He sails southward, too, on Portuguese merchant vessels, down the long coast of Africa to the fortress trading post of San Jorge da Mina, Elmina, on the Gold Coast of what is now Ghana. He crosses the equator. He watches the stars shift. And on these long passages, weeks at sea, nothing visible in any direction but water and sky. He observes the winds. This is perhaps the most practically consequential thing Columbus does during his Lisbon years, and it receives less attention than his books and his calculations. He notices that at lower latitudes, the trade winds blow steadily from the northeast, reliably, powerfully westward. He notices that at higher latitudes, the winds reverse, blowing from the west toward Europe. The Portuguese navigators have a name for this pattern, the volta do mar, the turn of the sea. Drop south toward the Canaries to catch the trades going west. Return north toward the Azores to catch the westerlies going east. It is a loop, a system, a key that fits the lock of the Atlantic. Columbus understands this with the deep, embodied understanding of a man who has felt it in his body, in the set of sails, in the way a ship moves when the wind is truly behind it. He writes to Toscanelli, the elderly Florentine astronomer, around 1481. He tells him of his plan. Toscanelli writes back, warmly, encouragingly, and sends a copy of his map, showing the Atlantic as a manageable crossing, the Asian coast waiting on the other side like a promise. Columbus pins the map in his mind and does not let go. Outside, the Tagus moves toward the sea. The ships come and go. The world is being remade, one voyage at a time, by men who are willing to sail toward the edge of what is known. Columbus watches. He studies, he waits, and the idea, fully flowered now, waits with him. Chapter 5. The Marriage That Opened Doors. Porto Santo, Madeira, 1478. The island is small, barely 10 miles long, and it sits alone in the Atlantic, far enough from the Portuguese mainland to feel like the beginning of somewhere else entirely. The wind here is different from Lisbon. Steadier, more insistent. It comes off the open ocean from the northwest, bending the low scrub vegetation on the hillsides, carrying the smell of deep water rather than the smell of a river mouth or a harbor. Columbus has sailed here on a trading mission for the Centurion family. 60,000 pounds of sugar to purchase and arrange for transport to Genoa. It is commercial work, the kind he has been doing for years, routine in its way. Except that on Porto Santo he meets a woman. Her name is Filipa Moniz Perestrello. She is, by every measure available to a wool weaver's son from Genoa, entirely beyond his reach. Her father, Bartolomeu Perestrello, was a Portuguese nobleman of Lombard origin who sailed under Prince Henry the Navigator, the great architect of Portuguese maritime expansion, and was appointed the hereditary captain, the governing lord, of Porto Santo itself. He has been dead since 1457, but the weight of his name and lineage endures. Philippa's mother, Isabel Moniz, comes from a family whose uncle served as Archbishop of Lisbon. Philippa herself has been living as a comendadora, a woman of rank within the military order of Santiago, at the Convent of All Saints in Lisbon, one of the most prestigious religious houses in Portugal. She is approximately 25 years old. She is unmarried, and her mother, widowed and of slender means, is not, according to the historian Samuel Eliot Morison, entirely averse to a son-in-law who asks for no dowry. They meet, according to Columbus's son Fernando, while Columbus attends Mass at the convent chapel in Lisbon, a detail that tells us something about Columbus even before it tells us anything about Philippa. He is a genuinely, deeply religious man, not performatively devout, not merely conventional in his piety, but someone for whom faith is as real and as present as wind or water. He goes to Mass regularly. He prays, he reads Scripture, and believes it literally, with the kind of uncomplicated certainty that would later lead him to compile his Book of Prophecies, a collection of biblical passages he became convinced described his own voyages. The chapel at the Convent of All Saints is where a man like Columbus would naturally be found on a Sunday morning in Lisbon. They marry in 1479 in Vila Baleira on Porto Santo. The marriage requires special authorization from the Master of the Order of Santiago, a reminder of how far Columbus has traveled socially from the wool workshop in Genoa. The wool weaver's son is now the son-in-law of a Portuguese nobleman, husband to a woman of rank and lineage, connected by marriage to the networks of the Portuguese maritime elite. What this means practically is significant. Philippa's mother shares her late husband's collection of nautical charts, logbooks, and navigational records. The accumulated documentation of Bartolomeu Perestrello's decades of Atlantic voyaging under Prince Henry. These are not casual maps. They are working documents, annotated with the hard-won knowledge of actual voyages, wind patterns, current observations, the behavior of the ocean at different latitudes, notes on the islands and the waters around them. Columbus absorbs them with the focused intensity of a man who has been waiting for exactly this kind of material. Scholars note that these charts significantly informed his developing theories about the Atlantic, filling in the empirical texture of what had until then been partly a bookish idea. The marriage also elevates him socially in ways that matter enormously for what comes next. Columbus is no longer a foreign sailor with an eccentric theory. He is a gentleman. He has connections to the Portuguese court. When he eventually brings his enterprise of the Indies to King John II, he will do so not as an outsider, but as someone who can claim, however tenuously, a place within the world of Portuguese maritime ambition. They live first in Lisbon, in the city that has become Columbus's true home. And then they move to Porto Santo, where the Atlantic is not a view but a presence, surrounding the island on every side, audible from every room, never quite out of mind. Their son Diego is born there, around 1479 or 1480. Columbus works his trading routes, continues his reading, continues refining his calculations. Felipa manages the household. The small family on the small island, perched at the edge of the known world, waiting for something that Columbus can feel coming, but cannot yet name. And then Philippa dies. The exact date is uncertain. Historians place it somewhere between 1479 and 1484, with most settling on around 1484. The cause is unknown. She simply disappears from the record, the way women so often disappear from the records of this era. Present in one document, absent in the next, her life compressed into a few facts and the lives she shaped around her. She is buried in the Chapel of Piety at the Carmo Convent in Lisbon. Columbus is left alone with Diego, who is perhaps 4 or 5 years old. He is a widower in a foreign country, with a plan that no one has yet agreed to fund, and a child who needs looking after, while his father pursues the impossible. What he feels, grief, loneliness, the particular weight of loss layered over ambition, we can only imagine. He does not write about it directly. He rarely writes about his inner life in the personal sense. What the documents show instead is action. Columbus does not stop. He does not retreat into mourning or abandon the idea. He places Diego with the monks at the monastery of La Rábida, where the boy will be cared for and educated. He continues working. He continues calculating. He continues preparing the presentation of his enterprise of the Indies for whatever king will eventually listen. There is something both admirable and troubling in this. The relentlessness of a man who has decided that what he is pursuing matters more than anything else, including grief, including rest, including the ordinary rhythms of a life lived at human scale. Columbus will carry Felipe's memory with him. He will acknowledge her in his will, ensure that Diego inherits properly. But he will not slow down. The Atlantic is still out there. The wind off Porto Santo still bends the scrub on the hillsides. The charts that Felipe's mother gave him are rolled and annotated and stored carefully among his things. And somewhere in that collection of maps and calculations and marginal notes, the shape of a voyage is becoming clear. Not yet, not quite yet, but closer now than it has ever been. He leaves Porto Santo with Diego and crosses to the Portuguese mainland. He has a plan to present. He has a king to find. And if this king says no, as kings so often do, there will be another king somewhere and another after that, until someone finally says yes. The sea is patient. Columbus is learning to be patient too, though it is costing him everything. Chapter 6. The King Who Said No, Lisbon, 1484. Columbus is 33 years old, possibly 32. Felipe is gone. Diego is small. The idea is fully formed now. Years of reading, sailing, annotating, calculating, living on an Atlantic island, with the wind always in his ears. And Columbus has decided it is time. He requests an audience with King John II of Portugal. John is, by almost any measure, the right king to ask. He is young, not yet 30, intelligent, educated, genuinely interested in exploration as both a commercial and political enterprise. The Portuguese have been pushing steadily down the African coast for decades, driven by the dream of finding a sea route to the spice markets of Asia and breaking the Venetian and Arab stranglehold on overland trade. John funds these expeditions personally, takes detailed interest in the navigational reports, and has assembled a small committee of experts, the Junta dos Matemáticos, to evaluate new proposals with something approaching scientific rigor. Columbus meets with the Junta dos Matemáticos, and the Junta dos Matemáticos says no, not capriciously, not out of ignorance or superstition. The old myth still stubbornly circulating that medieval scholars believed the earth was flat is simply not true. Educated Europeans had known the earth was spherical since antiquity. The Portuguese committee that evaluates Columbus's proposal is composed of serious, competent men who understand the geometry of a globe. They reject his plan for the same reason a careful reader of the evidence would reject it today. his numbers are wrong. Columbus has calculated the distance from the Canary Islands to Japan at approximately 2,400 miles. The junta places it at something considerably larger, closer in fact to the actual distance of roughly 10,600 miles. Columbus has underestimated the circumference of the Earth and overestimated the eastward extension of Asia, compounding two errors into one dangerously optimistic conclusion. The committee tells the king, with professional confidence, that any expedition sailing on Columbus's assumptions would run out of food and water long before reaching Asia. They are correct. They are, in this moment, the voice of reason. And Columbus, who has lived with this idea for long enough that it has become indistinguishable from conviction, who has annotated his books and studied his charts and felt the trade winds on his face for years. Columbus does not believe them. This is one of the great paradoxes of the story. The experts were right and the dreamer was wrong, and yet the dreamer's conclusion, sail west and reach land, turned out to be true. Not because his calculations were accurate, but because a continent he did not know existed happened to be in the way. History is sometimes like this. The wrong map, followed faithfully, still gets you somewhere. John listens to his committee. He is a pragmatic king, and pragmatism, in this instance, looks like rejection. There is a polite audience, and then there is a door, and then Columbus is on the other side of it. There is an additional wound. In 1488, Bartolomeo Diaz returns to Lisbon, having rounded the southern tip of Africa, the Cape of Good Hope, and proven that a sea route to Asia around the African continent is achievable. Whatever residual interest John might have had in an Atlantic alternative evaporates entirely. The Portuguese have their route. They do not need Columbus's westward gamble, with its suspicious arithmetic and its foreign-born champion. Columbus watches Diaz's triumphant return. He is likely in Lisbon for it. The historical record places him there in late 1488. He may have attended the reception at court. If so, he stands in a room full of people, celebrating the thing he has been offering to do by a different method, watching the moment that closes the Portuguese door permanently. We do not know what he feels. He does not record it. What we know is that he stays calm enough to write a note in the margin of his copy of Pierre d'Ailly. He records Diaz's voyage matter-of-factly in his neat, careful hand. And then he begins making arrangements to leave Portugal. He is going to Spain. He will start again. He will find another king. The door that has closed behind him is not, he decides, the last door. It is simply the first one. Outside, the Tagus moves toward the sea. Somewhere beyond it, past the Canaries, past the place where the known world ends, the wind blows westward. It is still blowing. Chapter 7. The Long Wait in Spain. He crosses into Spain in 1485, probably on foot, with Diego at his side. The boy is 5 or 6 years old. Columbus is 33 or 34, depending on which birth year the scholars favor, and he is carrying everything he owns: the charts, the annotated books, the letters, the calculations, the idea, into a country he has never lived in, whose language he speaks imperfectly, whose court he has no introduction to, and no particular reason to believe will receive him differently than the court he has just left. He walks southwest through the Andalusian landscape, the long dry hills, the olive groves, the white villages perched on ridges above river valleys, toward the Franciscan monastery of La Rábida, near the mouth of the Rio Tinto, where it meets the Rio Odiel and runs into the sea. He has heard of the monastery, or perhaps he simply follows the road until it ends at the water's edge and finds the monastery standing there. The historical record is quiet on the specifics. What it tells us is that Columbus arrives at La Rábida hungry and tired, and asks the monks for bread and water for himself and his son. What he receives is considerably more. The prior of La Rábida is a Franciscan friar named Juan Pérez, and Juan Pérez is not merely a hospitable monk. He is a man with connections, a former confessor to Queen Isabella herself, someone who knows the rhythms and personalities of the Spanish court intimately. He sits with Columbus over that first meal and listens to what this tall, red-haired Genoese sailor has to say. And something in what Columbus says, the seriousness of it, the years of preparation behind it, the quality of the idea, causes Juan Pérez to take him seriously. There is also a doctor in the nearby town of Palos de la Frontera named Garcia Fernández, sometimes called Garcia Hernández, who meets Columbus at La Rábida during these early days, and later testifies in legal proceedings that he was present for the conversations, that Columbus spoke persuasively and at length about his enterprise of the Indies, and that the monks were genuinely impressed. This document, part of the great legal archive known as the Pleitos Colombinos, the lawsuits Columbus's heirs later brought to recover rights they felt had been violated, gives us one of the few direct contemporaneous accounts of Columbus, as he actually was in these early Spanish years. Earnest, intense, convincing. Juan Pérez arranges an introduction. Through his connections to the court, Columbus is given access to Hernando de Talavera, the Queen's confessor, who agrees to evaluate the proposal formally. Columbus leaves Diego with the monks at La Rábida and travels to Córdoba, where the court of Ferdinand and Isabella is currently in residence. The court is at war. The 700-year effort to reclaim the Iberian Peninsula from Moorish rule, the Reconquista, is entering its final phase. Granada, the last Muslim kingdom in Spain, has not yet fallen. Ferdinand and Isabella are conducting an active military campaign, moving constantly, managing armies and finances and alliances with the complex, exhausting logistics of a kingdom fighting on multiple fronts. This is not, on the face of it, an ideal moment to petition for the funding of an exploratory ocean voyage. But Columbus gets his audience with Talavera. And then he waits. The waiting is extraordinary. Columbus spends the better part of 7 years, from 1485 to 1492, in this condition of suspended uncertainty, pursuing his proposal through the slow machinery of a royal court that has many other things to think about. He follows the court as it moves through Andalusia and Castile. He is sometimes given a small stipend, a modest daily allowance, suggesting the monarchs have not dismissed him entirely. He works as a map seller and cartographer to support himself. He writes letters to his brother Bartholomew, who is in England trying to interest Henry VII in the same proposal, and who will later try France with equal lack of success. It is during these Córdoba years that Columbus meets Beatriz Enriquez de Arana. She is a young woman of modest origin, an orphan, raised by relatives, probably around 20 years old when they meet in 1487. Columbus is 35 or 36. They are never married. Why not is unclear. Perhaps her social position is too low to formalize without embarrassing the status Columbus is carefully cultivating at court. Perhaps there is some other impediment. Perhaps he simply does not choose to. Their relationship is real and lasting. Their son Fernando is born in 1488, and Columbus acknowledges him fully, ensures he is educated, takes him on the fourth voyage, and in his will expresses guilt about what he failed to give Beatrice, asking Diego to provide for her out of love for him. Fernando Columbus will grow up to write a biography of his father, the History, and it is one of our most valuable sources, even accounting for a son's natural tendency toward admiration. In 1490, the Royal Commission finally delivers its verdict. After years of deliberation, years during which Columbus has been politely sustained and repeatedly deferred, Talavera's committee concludes that the enterprise of the Indies is impractical. Their reasoning overlaps with Portugal's. The ocean is too wide, the estimates are unreliable, the rewards are speculative. The commission recommends against royal support. Columbus is devastated, but not finished. He petitions again. He lobbies. He cultivates advocates within the court, people who believe in him or believe in the idea, or simply find the foreign cartographer with the burning conviction interesting enough to support. Among these advocates is Luis de Santangel, the keeper of the privy purse for the Crown of Aragon, a man whose job is quite literally to know where the money is and how to move it. Santangel is a converso, a Jewish convert to Christianity, navigating his own complicated position within a Spain that has just expelled its Jewish population in the same year it will send Columbus west. He sees something in Columbus's proposal, commercial logic perhaps, or the particular clarity that comes from understanding risk because you have lived with it your whole life. And there is Juan Perez still. In the autumn of 1491, Juan Perez writes directly to Queen Isabella, requesting permission to come to court and speak on Columbus's behalf. Isabella sends him a royal mule for the journey, a small detail that Fernando Columbus records with the precision of a man who knows its significance. A royal mule means the Queen is still listening. Juan Perez rides from La Rábida to the royal encampment at Santa Fe, outside the walls of besieged Granada, and speaks with the Queen directly, and still, initially, no. In January 1492, Granada falls. The Reconquista is complete. Ferdinand and Isabella ride into the Alhambra, that extraordinary palace of red stone and intricate plasterwork, and the sound of water, and the 700 years of effort reaches its extraordinary conclusion. Spain is, for the first time, entirely Christian and entirely united under a single crown. Columbus is at Santa Fe for this. He watches the Moorish king Boabdil hand over the keys, and then he waits again, one more time, for an answer that still does not come. When it comes as a refusal. The commission meets one more time and recommends against. Columbus packs his things. He arranges passage to France. Bartholomew has been trying France, and perhaps France will be more receptive, and there is no reason to stay in a country that has said no for the better part of a decade. He rides north out of Santa Fe on a mule. He has gone a few miles, to the village of Pinos Puente, the sources say, close enough that the towers of the royal encampment are perhaps still visible, when a royal messenger arrives at a gallop behind him. Luis de Santangel has gone back to the Queen. He has told her, with the directness of a man who manages money for a living, that the cost of the expedition is modest, that the potential reward is extraordinary, and that if Columbus goes to France, and France sends him west, and France finds whatever is out there, Spain will regret it for the rest of its history. The Queen has listened. Columbus turns his mule around. Chapter 8. The Agreement at Santa Fe. He rides back through the same landscape he has just ridden through, the same dry Andalusian hills, the same pale winter light, the same road running south toward the royal encampment at Santa Fe. And something has shifted that is not visible in the landscape, but is completely visible in him. For 7 years, he has been a man waiting. He is no longer waiting. The meeting with the Queen, or rather the series of meetings and letters and negotiations that follow Santangel's intervention, moves quickly now, with the urgency of something that has been held back too long. Isabella summons Columbus back to Santa Fe. There are discussions, there are adjustments. And then, on April 17, 1492, a document is drawn up and signed that will, in ways none of the people in that room can remotely imagine, change everything. It is called the Capitulations of Santa Fe. Read it today, and it has the quality of a document written by a man who has spent 7 years thinking about what he would ask for if anyone ever said yes. Columbus has been precise and demanding in his requirements, and the terms reflect that precision. He is to be granted the title of Admiral of the Ocean Sea, a hereditary title, passing to his heirs in perpetuity. He is to be made Viceroy and Governor-General of any lands he discovers, with the right to nominate 3 candidates for every administrative position from which the Crown will choose one. He is to receive 1/10 of all revenues, gold, silver, pearls, spices, and any other merchandise, derived from the territories he discovers. He is to have the option of contributing 1/8 of the cost of any commercial expedition to those territories and receiving 1/8 of the profit in return. These are extraordinary terms. They reflect not arrogance exactly, but the particular confidence of a man who believes, with complete sincerity, that what he is about to do will be so significant that no reward could adequately compensate for it. Columbus is not greedy in the ordinary sense. He is not interested in luxury or ease. What he wants is recognition, legitimacy, the permanent inscription of his name and his lineage into the record of history. The capitulations are less a salary negotiation than a declaration of what he believes he deserves from a world that has made him wait too long. Ferdinand and Isabella agree. The document is signed. The royal seal is affixed. There is a second document issued the same day, the letter of introduction, granting Columbus authority to travel and negotiate on behalf of the Spanish crown, and a third, the letter of credence, addressed vaguely to whatever great rulers he might encounter on the other side of the ocean, the Grand Khan of China, perhaps, or the Emperor of Japan, or whoever holds power in Asia. The letter leaves the addressee blank, a small and telling detail. They are preparing for someone they cannot name, in a place they cannot locate, reached by a route no one has ever taken. Columbus takes the documents and begins preparing. The port of Palos de la Frontera, near La Rábida, is chosen as the departure point, partly for practical reasons, partly because the town owes the crown a debt, payable in ships. 2 of the 3 vessels that will carry Columbus across the Atlantic are furnished this way: the Niña and the Pinta, both caravels, light and maneuverable, the workhorses of Portuguese and Spanish Atlantic exploration. The 3rd ship, the Santa Maria, is larger, a carrack, heavier, less nimble, hired from its owner Juan de la Cosa, who will also serve as its master and who will later produce one of the earliest maps of the New World. Recruiting a crew is more difficult than it might seem. Sailors are practical men, and practical men have questions about a voyage with no established route, commanded by a foreign-born captain of no particular military or naval fame, heading toward an ocean that has swallowed ships without returning them. The Pinzon brothers, Martín Alonso and Vicente Yáñez, are essential here. They are experienced Palos mariners with local credibility and networks, and their willingness to sign on brings others with them. Martín Alonso will command the Pinta. Vicente Yáñez will command the Niña. Without the Pinzons, there may be no crew. Without a crew, there is no voyage. Their contribution to what follows is rarely adequately acknowledged. There are approximately 90 men in total. Not the desperate criminals of later legend. The historical record shows them to be ordinary Spanish sailors, craftsmen, a handful of conversos, a surgeon, an interpreter who speaks Arabic on the assumption that Arabic might be useful in Asia. One man is serving out a sentence. There had been a royal decree offering pardons to criminals willing to sail, but only one. The rest are men who have calculated, in the way sailors calculate, that the risk is acceptable and the potential reward is real. Columbus spends these preparation weeks at La Rábida and Palos. He sees Diego, who is now 11 or 12, and who will be taken in by the Duke of Medina Sidonia's household while his father is gone. He sees Beatrice, who is in Córdoba, with Fernando, who is 3 years old. What passes between Columbus and Beatrice in these last weeks, we do not know. He does not record it. She does not record it. The silence around their relationship is consistent and complete, as if they have agreed together to keep whatever it is between them. On the evening of August 2nd, 1492, Columbus and his crew receive communion together at the Church of St. George in Palos. They confess, they pray, they make whatever private peace is available to men about to do something irreversible. And in the small hours of August 3rd, before dawn, with the tide running right and the wind beginning to move, the three ships ease out of the harbor of Palos into the Rio Tinto, and then into the open water, and then south. The ocean sea receives them without ceremony. It has been waiting a long time, too. Chapter 9. The Crossing. The first days are not difficult. The winds are favorable out of Palos, and the three ships make good progress southward along the Portuguese coast toward the Canary Islands, the last familiar landfall, the last place where Columbus and his crew can take on fresh water and provisions and look back at a coastline they recognize before turning west into what none of them have ever seen. They arrive at the Canaries in early August and spend nearly 3 weeks there. The Pinta has developed a problem with her rudder, possibly sabotage by her owner, who had not wanted the ship commandeered for this voyage, though this is speculation, and repairs take time. Columbus uses the delay to refit the Niña's sails, switching her from the triangular lateen configuration favored in the Mediterranean to the square sails better suited to running before a steady wind. He is already thinking about the trade winds. He is already planning for the crossing he knows is coming. On September 6, 1492, they leave the Canaries. The island of Hierro, the westernmost of the group, drops behind them. And then there is nothing. Nothing, that is, except water and sky and wind, and the three small ships moving through it. The Santa Maria largest, wallowing slightly in the swells, the Pinta fastest, pulling ahead whenever Martín Alonso Pinzón lets her, the Niña compact and steady and reliable. Columbus watches all of this from the Santa Maria's deck, keeping his journals, taking his readings, managing the anxieties of a crew that has agreed to sail into the unknown and is now, for the first time, actually doing it. He keeps 2 logs. This detail has passed into historical legend, often told as evidence of deliberate deception. Columbus, recording the true distance, traveled in a private log while telling the crew a lesser figure to prevent panic. The reality is more interesting and more ambiguous. Columbus does record 2 sets of distance figures, but modern analysis suggests his publicly shared figures were actually more accurate than his private ones, because his method of estimating speed was imprecise and his errors ran in different directions on different days. He was not deceiving his crew. He was, like any navigator of his era, doing his best with the instruments available, and the instruments were imperfect. The crossing takes 33 days from the Canaries to landfall. By the standards of what is being attempted, 33 days is not long. But inside those 33 days, there is an entire emotional world, hope and tedium and fear cycling through the crew in rhythms that Columbus tracks in his journal with the attention of a man who knows that managing morale is as important as managing navigation. The Sargasso Sea unsettles them. They sail into a region thick with floating seaweed, great mats of golden-brown sargassum stretching in every direction, and some of the men believe it means they are approaching shallow water, that they will run aground in the middle of the ocean, that the weed is a trap. Columbus reassures them. He has read about this in his books and believes correctly that the weed is simply a feature of this part of the Atlantic, not a sign of danger. He notes birds, land birds, he believes, flying overhead, and adjusts his course slightly to follow them, a decision that will later prove significant. Around the third week of October, unease deepens into something more serious. The crew has been at sea for over 2 weeks, with no landfall and no real indication of when landfall might come. Some of the men want to turn back. The Pinzon brothers, whose cooperation is essential, are still committed, but there are voices among the crew that Columbus records carefully without naming. He negotiates. He points to the birds. He points to the weed and bits of carved wood floating in the water. Signs, he tells them, of land nearby. He promises that if they have not found land within a few days, they will discuss turning back. He does not intend to turn back. On the night of October 11th, the tension reaches its peak. Columbus, standing watch on the Santa Maria's deck, sees something. A light, he writes, moving in the darkness ahead, rising and falling, as if carried by someone walking on an unseen shore. He is not certain what it is. He calls another man to look, and the other man sees it too, and then it is gone. Modern historians have argued about this light for centuries. It may have been a firefly, a bioluminescent wave, a torch on a beach, a reflection, a wish. Columbus believed it was real. 2 hours later, at approximately 2 o'clock in the morning on October 12, 1492, a cannon fires from the Pinta. Rodrigo de Triana, a sailor standing watch in the bow, has seen what no European alive has ever seen from this direction. A white sand coastline, catching moonlight in the darkness, low and long and unmistakable. He shouts the word that ends one world and begins another. Tierra. Land. Columbus, in his journal, notes the sighting, but claims the 10,000 maravedis reward for himself, because he saw the light the night before, he argues, and that was technically the first sighting. Rodrigo de Triana receives nothing. This detail is small and slightly ugly and completely characteristic. Columbus is capable of tremendous generosity and tremendous pettiness, sometimes in the same hour. And the question of who first saw the New World is one he settles in his own favor, with a briskness that tells you something about how he keeps score. In the morning they anchor offshore. Columbus dresses formally. He has thought about this moment, prepared for it, and is rowed ashore with the royal standard and the banners of the expedition. He kneels on the beach and weeps. He names the island San Salvador, the Holy Savior, and takes formal possession of it for the crowns of Castile and Aragon, reading the legal declaration aloud to an audience of Taino people who have come down to the shore to watch these strange, pale arrivals emerge from the sea. The Taino observe Columbus with the same curious, cautious attention with which Columbus observes them. Both sides are trying to understand what they are looking at. Neither entirely succeeds, but the crossing is complete. The ocean has been crossed. The world, both worlds, though only one of them knows it yet, will never be the same again. Columbus kneels in the sand and gives thanks. The trade winds move through the palm trees overhead, steady and warm, blowing west. Chapter 10. The Islands of the First Wonder. The Taino call their island Guanahani. Columbus calls it San Salvador and moves on almost immediately, which tells you something important about what he is actually looking for. He is not, in these first weeks, a man who has arrived somewhere and wants to understand where he is. He is a man passing through on his way to somewhere else. The gold-roofed palaces of Japan, the spice markets of China, the court of the Grand Khan that Marco Polo described with such intoxicating specificity. San Salvador is beautiful, its people gentle and curious and generous, but it is not Chipangu, it is not Cathay, it does not have the gold and the spices and the great cities. And so Columbus notes it carefully in his journal, the trees, the birds, the people, the color of the water, and then he sails. He sails southwest through the Bahamas, stopping at island after island, each one green and low and fringed with the impossibly clear water that he will spend the rest of his life trying to describe adequately in his journal. He names them as he goes: Santa Maria de la Concepcion, Fernandina, Isabella, claiming each one formally for the crown, reading the legal declaration to people who do not understand a word of it, and who have, in any case, lived on these islands for generations without requiring a Spanish document to confirm their existence. The Taino people he encounters across these islands are, by his own account, among the most beautiful and gentle people he has ever seen. He writes about them with genuine admiration, their physical grace, their generosity, the ease with which they share food and water and information. He also writes in the same journal entries about how easily they could be conquered and how useful they would be as slaves. Both things are present in Columbus's thinking from the very beginning, sitting side by side without apparent contradiction, the wonder and the calculation, the genuine appreciation, and the immediate assessment of what can be taken. He is following gold. The Taino wear small ornaments of it, and when Columbus asks, through signs, through the interpreter who speaks Arabic and finds it entirely useless here, they point south and west. There is more gold, they indicate, somewhere in that direction. There is always more gold in the direction they haven't sailed yet, and Columbus follows each indication with the focused persistence of a man who needs to find the cities he has promised his monarchs are out there. In late October, he reaches Cuba, which he initially believes may be the Chinese mainland. The island is large enough, the vegetation lush enough, the rivers wide enough that the hope seems reasonable. He sends his interpreter, the Arabic speaker, now entirely at sea linguistically, inland to find the court of the Grand Khan, and the interpreter returns having found instead a Taino village where people smoke dried leaves rolled into cylinders. Columbus notes this without much interest. He is looking for palaces and finds tobacco, and tobacco is not what he came for. By December, he has reached the northeastern coast of Hispaniola, the large island that is now divided between Haiti and the Dominican Republic. And here, finally, there is gold in quantities that feel significant. Not the great rivers of it he has imagined, but enough. The Taino chief Guacanagari receives him with extraordinary hospitality, and Columbus receives Guacanagari with genuine warmth. And for a brief, luminous moment, something like real exchange takes place between two worlds that have never touched before. Then, on Christmas Eve, the Santa Maria runs aground on a coral reef in the night and cannot be freed. Columbus watches his flagship die, the timbers cracking, the hull filling, the ship that carried him across the ocean settling into the reef with a finality that cannot be undone. The crew salvages what they can. Guacanagari sends canoes to help, and his people work alongside the Spanish sailors through the night, pulling timber and provisions and equipment from the wreck. From the wreckage, Columbus builds a fort. He names it La Navidad, the Nativity, because it is Christmas, and he leaves 39 men inside it, sails for Spain, and does not look back. Chapter 11. The Return and the Reckoning. He arrives home a different man than the one who left, not different in the way he imagines, not humbled or uncertain or changed by what he has seen, but different in the way that triumph changes people, which is to say, dangerously. Columbus sails into Palos on March 15, 1493, having survived a ferocious Atlantic storm on the return crossing that he was certain would kill him, certain enough that he wrote a summary of his voyage on a piece of parchment, sealed it in a barrel, and threw it into the sea, in hopes that if the ship went down, the knowledge would survive. It did not go down. He arrives in Spain with the parchment still in the barrel and 6 Taino people on his deck, taken from Guanahani and the other islands, brought west to demonstrate the reality of what he has found, and a collection of objects, parrots, unfamiliar plants, a small amount of gold, masks and belts of fishbone and shell. It is enough, more than enough. The letter Columbus writes to Luis de Santangel, describing his voyage, composed on the return crossing sent ahead from Lisbon, is already circulating through Europe by the time Columbus himself arrives. It is printed and reprinted with extraordinary speed, translated into Latin and distributed to courts and scholars and merchants across the continent. Columbus describes the islands in language so vivid and so carefully designed to excite that the letter is essentially a piece of marketing. The trees are more beautiful than the trees of Andalusia, the people gentle and generous and entirely without weapons, the gold available in quantities that will make the Spanish crown the richest in the world. Ferdinand and Isabella read it and summoned Columbus to court immediately. The reception at Barcelona is the high point of his life. He enters the city in a procession, the 6 Taino people walking with him, the parrots and the gold and the strange objects arranged for display. And the streets are lined with people who have read the letter or heard it read and want to see this man, this Admiral of the ocean sea, who has done the impossible. Ferdinand and Isabella receive him seated on their thrones beneath a golden canopy, and when Columbus approaches, they rise. They rise for him, a gesture of extraordinary honor, the monarchs of Spain standing for a wool weaver's son from Genoa. And Columbus, who has spent 7 years being made to wait in anteroom after anteroom, kneels at their feet and weeps again. They confirm his titles. They confirm the terms of the capitulations. They call him Don Cristobal Colon and treat him, for this brief, glittering moment, as a man of consequence. Planning for the second voyage begins almost immediately. If the first voyage was an act of faith, 3 ships, 90 men, an unproven route, a destination no one could confirm, the second is an act of certainty, which turns out to be considerably more dangerous. 17 ships, between 1,200 and 1,500 men, priests, farmers, craftsmen, soldiers, an entire colonial apparatus packed into hulls and pointed west, because Columbus has told the monarchs that Hispaniola is rich with gold, and the establishment of a permanent settlement there will generate revenues that will fund crusades and transform the Spanish Empire. He has told them what he believes. The problem is that what he believes is not entirely what is there. He returns to Hispaniola in November 1493 and finds La Navidad burned to the ground. The 39 men he left behind are dead, all of them, everyone. The Taino people in the area, through signs and limited communication, indicate that there was conflict. The men took women, took food, quarreled among themselves, and with the people around them. Guacanagari, the chief, who had been so hospitable, appears to have tried to help, but was overwhelmed. The details are unclear and remain unclear. What is clear is that the first European settlement in the Americas has lasted approximately 8 months before being entirely destroyed. Columbus does not dwell on this. He moves east along the coast, finds a new location, and begins building a new settlement, La Isabela, named for the Queen. It is a poor location, exposed to wind and rain, without adequate fresh water nearby, and the men who have come expecting gold and easy prosperity find instead disease, hunger, and the hard physical work of building a town from nothing in an unfamiliar climate. They sicken, they die, they complain in the vigorous and specific language of men who feel they have been misled, which many of them have been. Columbus is not a good governor. This becomes clear almost immediately and will become clearer still over the years that follow. He is visionary and stubborn and capable of extraordinary endurance, but the skills that sustain a man across an ocean, solitary conviction, the ability to hold a course against all resistance, certainty in the face of uncertainty, are not the skills that hold a community together in a difficult place. He governs harshly when he governs at all, delegates poorly, fails to anticipate the needs of people who are frightened and sick and far from home. The gold is not there in the quantities he promised. The great cities are not there. The Grand Khan is not there. What is there is an island of extraordinary beauty and complexity, and a people who are beginning to understand, with gathering dread, what the arrival of these strangers is going to mean for them. Columbus explores. He searches. He insists, against accumulating evidence, that what he has found is the edge of Asia. The ships need careening. The men need feeding. The idea needs defending. He is very tired, but he does not stop. Chapter 12. The Weight of the Admiral. The second voyage ends badly, and Columbus knows it. He sails back to Spain in June 1496 aboard the Niña, the same small caravel that carried him home in triumph 3 years earlier, now crowded and stinking, carrying men who are sick and angry and disillusioned. Columbus himself is ill, thinner than he was, aged in ways that photographs cannot show us, but contemporary descriptions suggest: the reddish hair going white, the joints beginning to trouble him, the eyes that will later give him serious problems already showing signs of strain. He is 44 or 45 years old, and looks, by some accounts, considerably older. He arrives in Cadiz to a reception that is not Barcelona. There is no procession. There are no crowds lining the streets. Ferdinand and Isabella receive him, and the meeting is cordial enough, but the atmosphere has changed in the way that atmospheres change when promised results have not materialized. He told them there would be gold. There is some gold, but not enough. He told them the settlement would prosper. La Isabela has been abandoned, its population moved to a new location on the southern coast of Hispaniola, Santo Domingo, founded by his brother Bartholomew. But prosperity is not the word anyone would use to describe it. He has also sent slaves. This is perhaps the darkest chapter in a story that has many dark chapters. In 1495, Columbus rounded up approximately 1,500 Taíno people and selected 560 of what he considered the best specimens to send to Spain as slaves. 200 died on the voyage. The survivors arrived in Seville and were sold. Isabella, when she learned of it, was appalled. These people were subjects of the crown, she argued, not property, and ordered the remaining slaves freed and returned to Hispaniola, though the execution of this order was incomplete and slow. Columbus had exceeded what even the standards of his brutal era permitted, and the monarchs knew it. And yet, they send him back. This is the thing that is easy to overlook in the familiar narrative of Columbus's decline. That Ferdinand and Isabella, fully aware of his failures as a governor, fund a third voyage. They do so because the idea is still real, because the islands are still there, because the question of what exactly Columbus has found has not been fully answered, and because the Portuguese, who have now rounded Africa and reached India, are a constant competitive pressure that makes continued Atlantic exploration feel strategically necessary. The third voyage departs in May 1498. Columbus takes a more southerly route this time, following a hunch, or perhaps a calculation, or perhaps the accumulated instinct of a man who has been thinking about Atlantic navigation for 20 years. That land lies further south than he has yet explored. On August 1st, 1498, he sees a coastline that does not resolve into an island. It is the northeastern coast of what is now Venezuela. The mouth of the Orinoco River pours fresh water into the Gulf of Paria with such volume and such force that Columbus, standing on deck, understands that no island produces a river of this size. This is a continent. This is, as he writes in his journal, otro mundo, another world. He writes it down, and then he sails away. Not because he doesn't believe it, he believes it. The evidence is undeniable, and Columbus's instincts about the ocean have always been sound, even when his theories are wrong. He sails away because he cannot afford to believe it. If this is a new world and not the edge of Asia, then everything he has promised, the route to the spice trade, the passage to the Grand Khan, the enterprise of the Indies as he has always described it, collapses. He has staked everything on Asia. He chooses Asia, and he sails north toward Hispaniola and the disaster that is waiting for him there. Chapter 13. The Man in Chains. Hispaniola is ungovernable, and Columbus has failed to govern it. This is the truth that arrives before he does, carried in letters and depositions and formal complaints from colonists who have found their way back to Spain and presented themselves at court with specific documented grievances. The colony is in open rebellion. Spanish settlers are fighting among themselves and against the Columbus brothers, Christopher, Bartholomew, and their younger brother Diego, who has been left in charge during various absences, with the organized fury of men who believe they have been cheated and mistreated and poorly led. There are accusations of arbitrary punishment, of colonists hanged without proper trial, of favoritism and mismanagement, and the particular cruelty that emerges when frightened. Disappointed people are governed by someone who does not know how to govern frightened, disappointed people. Ferdinand and Isabella have heard enough. They appoint a royal commissioner named Francisco de Bobadilla and send him to Hispaniola with authority to investigate and, if necessary, to act. Bobadilla arrives in Santo Domingo in August 1500. Columbus is not there. He is in another part of the island. But the evidence of what Columbus's governance looks like is visible immediately and dramatically. 7 Spanish colonists are hanging from gibbets in the town square, and Bartholomew Columbus informs Bobadilla that 5 more are scheduled to hang shortly. Whatever else can be said about the situation, it does not look like order. It looks like a man using violence to hold together something that violence cannot hold together. Bobadilla moves quickly. He seizes Columbus's papers, his property, his residence. He interviews colonists who are eager, after years of resentment, to describe in detail everything the Admiral has done wrong. And when Columbus returns to Santo Domingo, Bobadilla arrests him. He is put in chains, iron shackles on his wrists and ankles, the kind used for serious criminals, and he is placed aboard a ship and sent to Spain to answer for his conduct. Columbus's son, Fernando, who was not present but recorded his father's account later, writes that Columbus refused to have the chains removed during the voyage, even when the ship's captain offered to take them off. He wore them all the way to Spain, and when he arrived, he kept them. He carried the chains to his quarters and hung them on the wall, and Fernando writes that he demanded they be buried with him when he died. He did not get this wish, but he kept the chains for the rest of his life. There is something in this that is very Columbus, the dramatization of injustice, the refusal to let the wound close, the transformation of humiliation into a kind of permanent testimony. He had done wrong in Hispaniola, genuinely and seriously wrong, and he knew it on some level, because he was not an entirely unself-aware man. But the chains were not, in his understanding, about what he had done. They were about what had been done to him, the Admiral of the Ocean Sea, the Viceroy and Governor-General, the man who had crossed the ocean when no one believed it could be crossed, reduced to a prisoner in his own domain by a bureaucrat sent from a court that did not understand what governing a new world actually required. Whether you find this sympathetic or infuriating depends on what you weigh more heavily. The genuine injustice of a man being punished for failures that were partly structural, partly the inevitable result of impossible expectations, or the genuine harm done to the Taíno people and to Spanish colonists under a governance that was often brutal and arbitrary. Both things are true. Columbus holds them both without resolving them, which is perhaps the most honest thing about him. Ferdinand and Isabella receive him in December 1500. They have the chains removed. They restore him to freedom and to his titles, technically, formally, on paper, but they do not restore him to governance. Bobadilla remains in Hispaniola. A new governor, Nicolas de Ovando, is appointed to replace him. Columbus will never govern again. He is given time to recover, and he uses it to write. The Book of Privileges is a careful, systematic compilation of every royal document that confirms his rights and titles. A legal archive assembled by a man who no longer fully trusts the people who granted those rights to honor them. The Book of Prophecies is something stranger and more revealing. A collection of biblical passages and writings from church fathers, compiled with the help of a Carthusian monk, arguing that Columbus's voyages were foretold in Scripture, that he was chosen by God to open the way to Jerusalem, that the gold he found in the Indies would fund the crusade that would reclaim the holy city before the end of the world. This is not cynical. Columbus genuinely believes it. He has believed something like it for years. The mystical undercurrent that runs through all his writings, the sense of divine mission that sustained him through the 7 years of waiting in Spain, through the storms at sea, through the failure of the second voyage. The chains in this framework are not evidence of wrongdoing, but of the suffering that accompanies any great mission. He is not a failed governor. He is a prophet in a temporary wilderness. It is a more comfortable story than the one Bobadilla's documents tell. Columbus prefers it, and works on it carefully, and believes it with the same focused sincerity with which he has believed everything else. He is 50 years old. He is free but diminished. He is ill with what historians now believe was reactive arthritis, painful, episodic, not fatal, but exhausting. And he is already planning a 4th voyage. Chapter 14. The Last Voyage. He is 50 years old when he sails for the last time, and he knows, in the way that ill men sometimes know things, that this is the last time. The 4th voyage departs from Cadiz on May 11th, 1502, with 4 small ships and approximately 140 men. Columbus has fought hard for this expedition. Ferdinand and Isabella granted it partly out of residual faith in his navigational instincts, partly because the question of what lies south and west of the Caribbean has still not been fully answered, and partly, perhaps, out of the particular guilt that powerful people sometimes feel toward those they have used and discarded. He is allowed to sail. He is not allowed to stop at Santo Domingo. Ovando, the new governor, has standing instructions not to let Columbus interfere with the colony's administration. And he is not to bring back slaves. His brother Bartholomew is with him. His son Fernando, now 13 years old, is with him too. The boy who will one day write the biography that preserves so much of what we know, sailing west with his father into the last great effort, watching everything with the attentive eyes of someone who will spend the rest of his life trying to understand what he saw. Columbus reaches the Caribbean in late June and immediately encounters a hurricane. He reads the signs, the long swells, the particular color of the sky, the behavior of the wind, and sends a message to Ovando at Santo Domingo warning him that a storm is coming and requesting permission to shelter in the harbor. Ovando refuses and simultaneously sends a large fleet of 30 ships eastward toward Spain. Columbus, denied harbor, rides out the storm at sea with his 4 small ships. The fleet Ovando sent toward Spain sails directly into the hurricane. 25 ships go down. Hundreds of men die. Among the dead is Francisco de Bobadilla, the man who put Columbus in chains 2 years earlier, drowned in the storm Columbus predicted and was refused harbor to avoid. Columbus survives. His 4 ships survive, damaged but intact, because he read the ocean correctly. He spends the following months exploring the coast of Central America, what is now Honduras, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, Panama, moving south and east along a coastline that no European has charted, searching for the strait he believes must exist, the passage through to the Indian Ocean that will vindicate everything, that will prove that he has found not a new world, but the eastern edge of the old one. He is still looking for Asia. He will always be looking for Asia. The coast gives him gold, traded with local people who have it in quantities that briefly reignite his excitement, and a name, Veragua. He writes to Ferdinand and Isabella about Veragua with the feverish optimism that characterizes his best letters and his worst judgments, describing gold mines of almost unimaginable richness, a new source of revenue that will fund the crusade to Jerusalem, the fulfillment of prophecy and promise. He attempts to establish a small settlement there at the mouth of a river he names Belen. The settlement lasts weeks before attacks from the local population, and the impossibility of the location force him to abandon it. He comes within miles of the Pacific Ocean. At the Isthmus of Panama, the land narrows to a thin ridge, and the indigenous people tell him, through interpreters now somewhat more useful than the Arabic speaker of the first voyage, that there is another ocean on the other side, just days away. He does not cross to look. He cannot cross. His ships are on the Atlantic side, his men are sick and exhausted, the jungle is impassable, and he is not in a condition to lead a land expedition through unknown terrain. He turns away from the Pacific without seeing it. It is one of the great near misses of exploration history, the ocean that would finally prove the true size of the world, that would make undeniable what Columbus could never bring himself to accept, that what he found was not Asia, but something entirely separate and entirely new, lies just beyond the ridge. Columbus turns his back on it and sails north. The ships are in desperate condition. Shipworm, the teredo worm that bores through wooden hulls in tropical waters, has eaten them from the inside until they are, as Columbus writes, like honeycombs. The pumps must run constantly just to keep them afloat. He loses 2 ships entirely and limps northward on the remaining 2 toward Hispaniola, hoping to reach port before they go under. He does not make it to Hispaniola. In June 1503, both remaining ships run aground in a bay on the northern coast of Jamaica, too damaged to float, and there Columbus and his men are marooned. They are there for a year, 1 year, on a beached and rotting ship, dependent on the goodwill of the local Arawak people for food and water, unable to leave, sending desperate messages by canoe toward Hispaniola, and receiving for months nothing in return. Ovando, in Santo Domingo, is in no hurry to rescue the man he has been told to keep away from the colony. Columbus, sick and immobile in a cabin built on the rotting deck, manages one extraordinary stroke. He knows from his astronomical tables that a total lunar eclipse is coming on February 29th, 1504. He summons the Arawak chiefs and tells them that his God is angry with them for reducing the food supply, and that God will demonstrate his anger by causing the moon to disappear. The eclipse occurs exactly as predicted. The Arawak people, terrified, restore the provisions. It is manipulation, conscious, deliberate, using knowledge as power over people who have no way to evaluate the claim. It is also, in its way, a last demonstration of the quality that defined Columbus from the beginning. The ability to read the world more clearly than the people around him, and to use that reading to survive. He is rescued in June 1504. He sails for Spain in September and arrives on November 7th, barely able to walk. 18 days later, Queen Isabella dies. Chapter 15. The Dying of the Light. Spain receives him quietly this time, which is its own kind of answer. There is no procession, no golden canopy, no monarchs rising from their thrones. There is a bed in Seville where Columbus lies through the winter of 1504 into 1505, ill with the reactive arthritis that has been building in him for years, the joints swollen and painful, the eyes bleeding intermittently, the fevers coming and going with the unpredictable rhythm of a disease that does not kill but does not relent. He is 53 years old, and his body is settling its accounts with 4 Atlantic crossings, with the year marooned on Jamaica, with decades of exposure and exertion, and the particular physical cost of willing yourself across an ocean on inadequate information. Isabella is gone. This matters more than it might seem. Ferdinand is alive and nominally in charge, but it was Isabella who was Columbus's true patron, who listened to Juan Perez, who recalled him from the road to France, who rose from her throne at Barcelona. Ferdinand has never been as personally invested. The two men have a relationship that is cordial on the surface and cool beneath it, and without Isabella to warm the middle ground between them, Columbus finds the court a different and less hospitable place. He recovers enough to travel by 1505 and spends the following months doing something that would be heartbreaking if Columbus were capable of being entirely pitied, following the court from city to city, Segovia to Salamanca to Valladolid, petitioning for the restoration of his titles and revenues, insisting on the terms of the capitulations, presenting his legal documents to officials who receive them politely and do nothing. He travels by mule because he cannot ride a horse. Some days he cannot travel at all. He is not destitute. This is worth saying clearly, because the image of Columbus dying in poverty is more romantic than accurate. He has income. He has his sons Diego and Fernando attending him. He has his brother Bartholomew, faithful as he has always been, still at his side. He has lodgings and food and the basic dignities of a man of his station. What he does not have is what he has always wanted more than comfort: the recognition, the titles, exercised in fact, rather than on paper, the permanent inscription of his achievement in the record of the world. Ferdinand offers him a compromise in 1505, a revenue-generating estate in Castile in exchange for relinquishing his claim to the governorship of the Indies. Columbus refuses. He will accept nothing less than what the capitulations promised. He is still, even here, even now, the man who turned his mule around on the road from Santa Fe because the terms were not good enough. He makes his will in Valladolid in May 1506. It is a careful document, attending to everyone he has loved and failed and owed: Diego as primary heir, Fernando, acknowledged fully as his son, Beatriz Enriquez de Arana, for whom he expresses guilt without quite explaining it, asking Diego to provide for her in a way that satisfies Columbus's conscience. The people of Genoa, to whom he leaves a small bequest, because he has never entirely stopped being from there. The monks of La Rábida, who gave him bread and water when he had nothing. He dies on May 20th, 1506, in Valladolid. It is Ascension Day, a detail that would not have been lost on a man who read the calendar as scripture. His brothers are with him. His sons are with him. Ferdinand is nearby in the city but does not come, having not received word in time or having chosen not to receive it. The record is ambiguous, and the ambiguity feels appropriate. His last words, according to Fernando, are from the Gospel of Luke, the words that Christ spoke from the cross: "In manus tuas, Domine, commendo spiritum meum." Into your hands, Lord, I commend my spirit. He dies believing he has reached Asia. He has not reached Asia. He has found something that will take the world generations to fully comprehend. A hemisphere, 2 continents, a biological and cultural exchange of staggering consequence, a collision of worlds that will reshape everything. But Columbus himself does not know this. He goes to his death holding the idea he crossed the ocean to prove, the idea that turned out to be wrong in its particulars and transformative in its consequences. The chains are still on the wall, the sea is still out there, and somewhere in the Atlantic the trade winds blow westward still, as they always have, as they always will, steady and patient and entirely indifferent to the men who learn to read them. In 1507, a German cartographer named Martin Waldseemüller printed a map of the world. It was the most accurate map of its kind yet made, incorporating the latest reports from Portuguese and Spanish voyages, drawing coastlines that no European had seen a generation earlier, assembling the new shape of a world that was still resolving itself out of rumor and observation and the slow accumulation of voyages. On this map, Waldseemüller named the western landmass after Amerigo Vespucci, the Florentine navigator who had sailed the South American coast and written, clearly and publicly, what Columbus could never bring himself to write, that what he found was not Asia, not the edge of the known world, but something entirely new. Mundus novus, a new world. Columbus's name does not appear on the map. He has been dead 1 year. It is a strange kind of immortality he has ended up with. He wanted titles, revenues, the hereditary governorship of everything he discovered. He wanted his sons to inherit an empire and his name to be spoken in the same breath as the great navigators of Portugal. He wanted, beneath all of it, to be understood, to have the thing he did recognized for what he believed it was. What he received instead is harder to hold and harder to lose. His name attached itself not to a title or a territory, but to a moment, the before and the after, the crack in history through which everything poured. The Columbian Exchange, The collision of worlds, the catastrophe and the transformation, bound together so tightly they cannot be separated. The Taino called their island Guanahani. Most of them would not survive the century. The ocean he crossed is still there. The trade winds still blow westward, steady and patient and entirely indifferent to what they made possible. He asked for recognition. The world gave him consequence instead. Have a good night, and I hope we will meet again tomorrow.